Great. Thank you, Tim. I want to thank Extreme Anglers, both Tim and Gary, for having me here tonight. And thank all of you guys for coming out to join us. I want to let you know that we are videotaping this, so you folks are also going to get to be a part of westernbass.tv this evening. I don't know that we'll be able to get the whole 2 hours up on the internet, so you're going to have a little bit of advantage over everybody else being here tonight. But what we're going to go through tonight with Clear Lake, I'm going to start off with a little bit of theory, okay? We're going to talk about the lake, what the lake is made up of, the forage, and some seasonal patterns. And then we're going to take a little break, and then we're going to go and we'll discuss some of the techniques that I use up there when I'm tournament fishing, techniques that I use when I'm guiding, and techniques that I use when I'm fun fishing, because Clear Lake is an extreme diverse fishery. Between the Delta and Clear Lake, I'm not sure which one I qualify as the baddest fishery in the United States today. And there's no doubt in my mind, having fished a lot of the lakes throughout the United States, Cooper, Guntersville, Lake Fork, Okeechobee, Toho. I mean, I fished a lot of these big bass factories. And I've watched BASS tournaments and FLW tournaments, and we don't see the consistent kind of weights on those ponds. You see them every now and then, okay? But we don't see the consistency that we see here and on Clear Lake. And I think Clear Lake is probably a little bit more diversified of a fishery than what the river out here in the Delta is. The Delta fish get controlled by a lot of different factors. Clear Lake, we're dealing more with the type of bass that we're used to dealing with, and those are bass in the lakes. And the real neat thing about Clear Lake, and the way it's situated up in Northern California in the foothills there in Lake County, is we've got the best of everything up there, okay? You've got a natural lake, okay? We don't have a lot of streams and river flow coming in, so we don't have a lot of fluctuation of the lake. There are no power generation plants on there taking water and shipping it down to Southern California, okay? It all stays right there. The only time that the water draws down is late in the summer, you know, as it's evaporating. Basically, I mean, they let some water out of Cache Creek. You'll find some current down in Cache Creek, and you'll find a little bit coming in at Rodman. But everything that comes into that lake is all natural. Okay, we don't have it dammed up, so it's a natural pond, which makes it very unique. The way Clear Lake is designed, you've got the big northern end that comes down, and then we got two southern fingers. I know this is a very bad picture, but it's pretty close. But it does kind of look a little bit like a fish. This is why they call it a fish factory. I mean, I can only assume that. But the key with the way this lake is developed, you've got this portion of the lake from about Soda Bay, which runs down in here. You got Long Tule Point from here. This whole north section of the lake is extremely shallow. Okay, and what I mean by shallow, you know, shallow is a relative term, but on this lake, shallow here runs anywhere from a foot to maybe 15, 20 foot of water, okay, out here in the middle, along the shorelines in some areas up around Nice and Lucerne. And then you get into your 20, 25 foot areas out here in the middle. As you begin to get south on the lake down into the Two Fingers, you got Big Cobb Mountain up here, okay? It's an old volcano. At one time it went kaboom. And what it did was it dropped a bunch of rocks down on this area of the lake when it did that, forming a much deeper section of the lake. And I think when that kaboom occurred also way back then, these rocks kind of fell into a valley and filled the valley up. Well, this end of the lake, we have a much, much deeper section of that lake. This lake has really got two faces on it. You've also got, down in this area, you've got many areas of shallow bays, which these fish down in here can move from deep to shallow as well. So it's pretty unique. You've got the one major creek coming in up here at Rodman. That's where the majority of all the water falls down out of the mountains. I mean, Clear Lake's pretty high. It's what, about 1,000, 1,500 foot at sea level. And it's only got this one major arm coming in here, and then you've got Cache Creek down on the south end. Okay, but what guys really don't realize that this really isn't just the whole entire lake by itself. There's a lot of this lake that we don't see on our maps, especially when the water rises and the lake floods. We now begin to get ponds and flooded bays off in the Ozarks, that I call them, where a lot of these bass in the springtime like to get to move. A lot of the forage on this lake moves up in to move. This lake is so big, there's no way you can cover it in a weekend or a week. Okay? You've got to spend a lot of time to get up there and get an understanding of what really is going on up there. And I'm going to hopefully tonight be able to give you a little better understanding and what to look for at the different times of the year. The thing that you've got to keep in mind when you're fishing down on this end of the lake is generally a lot different than what you're doing up at this end of the lake, because you're fishing a shallow section of the lake versus a deeper section of the lake. They do both fish a lot differently. Now, one of the other cool things on this lake is that on both ends of the lake there's a lot of structural changes and there's a lot of cover. And you have to really come to the understanding that there's a big difference between structure and cover. Okay? Structure on a lake is where you got a bank that comes down and you have a change in the contour. Okay? Your water levels here. Okay? Where you've got this first 3-foot drop and then it changes and goes flat, that's a structural change. That little bend, that's your structural change. That's the first structural change from the bank. You come out here to the next drop off, that's your secondary structural change, and then you'll have other minute structural changes as well as you'll have offshore structural changes. Okay? This is very, very critical in understanding what these bass up here do the majority of the time year round, because bass love to hang around structural changes. And depending on the time of year and the situation, they're going to move from one piece of structure to another accordingly. And depending on what part of the lake you're fishing, where they move on that structure could vary. Okay? And that's why you've got to keep an open mind when you're up there. Okay, I'm fishing the shallow end, I'm fishing the deep end. What structural changes I have down there aren't the same as what I have up on the other end of the lake. Now, within this, we have cover. Okay? Remember, the structural changes are the hard changes on the bottom. That's your structure. Now, within that structure, we have cover. Okay, cover can be a wide variety of things. And probably the predominant cover up at Clear Lake right now, which makes this fishery as good as it is the grass. There are 4 or 5 different kinds of grass. You know, all the folks up there about 4 or 5 years ago, maybe even longer than that, went up in arms and started spraying programs, and they blamed all us guys down on the Delta for bringing all the coontail and the lodia and all of that stuff up there on our boats, and it infested the lake. Well, I don't feel sorry for them in the least, okay? And they can spray that stuff all they want, and they're never going to get rid of it. That stuff right there is the #1 key why that fishery has come back. Okay, because there was a point in time when there wasn't any grass. All the grass in that lake was beginning to dissipate, and the only other cover they had was the massive tules that infest the entire lake, which is another thing that the Delta and Clear Lake have in common is this shallow water promotes the growth of tules. Tules are great. They provide the same kind of cover, okay, in place of the grass. But that's what makes this fishery so difficult for most guys, is those fish, they have a variety of cover to get into. The tules, which are very difficult to fish at times because they're just massive and they cover the entire lake, but they stick pretty much to the shoreline. You don't have any offshore islands like what we got on the Delta. So that's one thing that you can count on, is that when you find tules, you're going to find them on the bank. Okay? The grass can be found throughout the entire lake. And it doesn't matter whether you're on the deep end or you're on the shallow end. There are some areas, many areas down on the deep end where you got them big lava rock boulders. Okay, we've all heard of the rock piles of Clear Lake down at Rattlesnake Island. You know, we got the big island down here on the south end of the lake. Okay, down a rattlesnake. Down there, you're not going to find any grass down there. Okay, as you begin to get into the Keys and some of the backwater areas over by the Indian reservation and up along this side, you'll find that. But out in the middle, you're not going to find that. Out here in the middle of the lake where you got the big conglomeration of shag rock, okay, you're not going to find any grass out there. That whole bank that comes down through around here that leads up to Buckingham, you're not going to find any grass there. But where you will find grass, as you come up along the rock walls along here, you're going to find grass coming off the shore all the way from here all the way around the other end of the lake. Okay, here it's going to be very sparse areas of grass, and really the majority of the time of the year you want to be looking for that grass when you're down on this end of the lake, because when you've got structural changes and you've got grass, you've got an area and an opportunity where bass are going to maintain their lives and stay and live. Now you throw in some tules in and around that area, you've added an additional piece of cover, an opportunity for those bass to make a sudden change on us. Now, there's a third type of cover that we have on the lake. So as far as cover, we've got grass, we've got tules, okay, and then we got docks. Okay, the docks are huge. Docks are huge. It used to be back in the old days before we had all the grass, the docks were the primary covers. Any of you guys used to fish Clear Lake 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years ago? All we used to do was fish the docks. Yeah, we used to fish, that's all we used to do, because if they weren't in the tules, they were on the docks. It was real easy to pattern fish back in the olden days. And the cool part about it was, these docks extend 70, 80, 90 feet out into the water, some of them 200 feet out into the water. So there are varying levels where the water changes, the structure changes as the docks come out. So as those bass would move on the structure, they could move out onto the next point and change and still find cover way out there. Okay? And they were real easy to pinpoint. They still are. Okay? They still are. But these docks right now are very critical, because when those fish pull off from the spawning, especially in the flat areas where there's not a lot of grass and there ain't no tules when they pull off, the docks are a primary piece of cover that they're going to want to hang on. Okay? Now, we have a third cover up there is wood. And that wood you're going to find mostly in a lot of the backwater areas. Okay? You can get down to the island on Cache Creek, and you'll find the wood and the trees and the laydowns all down in this area, all up in Rodman, beyond the bridge. Okay, you've got all kinds of wood up there, and this is where you find the majority of this laydown wood. Okay, and what most of this is willow trees. Okay, every lake in the state of California has a variety of willow tree growing on it, and that variety is specific and unique to that lake. In other words, if I took shoots from a willow tree at Clear Lake and went and tried to plant them at Oroville, they wouldn't survive. If I took shoots from Oroville and went and tried to plant them at Shasta, they wouldn't survive. They're very unique to that area. We did a planting program with the BBAC up at Oroville. Oh God, Bob, how many years ago was that? I mean, we're talking back in the late 90s, maybe late 80s, maybe in the early 90s. And what they did was they went up originally and grabbed some of these willow bushes that came from one of the lower lakes and tried to put them in there, and they couldn't rear them. So then they went and they cut shoots of what was existing on the lake, and they were able to get to rear those from Oroville and plant them. But the important part is those willow bushes are another very important cover item, I think, that gets overlooked a lot up at Clear Lake. There's a couple guys that understand that, how they use that cover, and we'll talk a little bit about how each of the various covers are used by these bass and what to look for when you pull up on one of those. What else do we got? Those really are the 5 primary pieces of cover that I look for. There are others as we discuss and come along. I think something will kind of sort of pop in there for me, but these are the most important, and actually we're talking about 4 that are available. Another piece of cover that we have up there is kind of like what we find here on the Delta in the summertime. They get the cheese that grows up there. Okay, that's really part of the grass system. And this is where we're going to break this down on this grass. There are 3 or 4 different varieties of grass up there, some of which the bass really like, some of which they don't like. Some they move into at certain times of the year, and some they don't move into. If you've seen the little green dollar grasses, what look like lily pads, what you would see on another lake, it kind of looks like the juvenile hyacinth that we have that grows out here in the Delta. Okay, I call it dollar pads. I don't know what else to call it. I don't know exactly what it's called, but these grow real thick in some areas, predominantly down on this end of the lake. Okay, this stuff is real cool because when you have a deep drop on a bank and this grass is growing, it creates a canopy. Those fish love to get up underneath that canopy in the summertime. Okay, in the wintertime and the pre-spawn, they don't seem to be around that kind of stuff. So when you come up to those canopies, you don't really want to spend a lot of time on that outside of when you're there in the summertime. When you're in the summertime, that's a cover and piece of pattern that you want to follow and check to see if that bite is there. The other grass that they have is the tall leafy stuff, which grows really mostly up at this end of the lake and around all the tules way offshore. This stuff is real good because the hitch get in there. And we're going to talk a little bit about forage next. And there are certain times of the year when guys are throwing swim bait, you want to be around this kind of grass. Okay, then the predominant grass up there, the Alodia, which is the coontail looking grass, it's very similar to what we have here on the Delta. This is probably the most predominant grass the bass use up there year round. Okay, they're in and out of that. There are caves that are created. There are just masses and masses of these grass items. And the thing that you're looking for whenever you're fishing that is remember that bass they tend to be structure oriented, okay? They like changes, okay? They also like points, okay? Anything that forms a point creates an ambush place for a bass to hide, okay? And this holds true with the grass just as well, because you may have a big grass mat that's out in the middle of nowhere where on the north end and the south end, you've actually got a point. Okay, this is when you hear guys talk about patterns within a pattern. Okay, I'm going to go out, I'm going to go find a point that's got some grass, it's got a big grass pocket on it. Okay, on this big grass pocket, I need to figure out, okay, where are these fish going to be? You want to start on the points of the grass. That's the most likely spot that those fish are going to be. Anywhere where that grass goes in and forms a cove on the inner and outer edge, again, you've got a point. This is a place where the bass is going to sit and wait for something to come by for him to clock. So it's real important, no matter what types of baits that you're fishing, you're looking and pitching and casting and cranking past, in, and around these ambush things, these points, because points are very critical to bass. Especially on Clear Lake. They love the points. Anything that forms a point, they're going to be real close to. So when you come up to a grass pocket, it's not best to throw right in the middle, and it's not best to throw along the long straight edge. You want to look for the little subtle points. Cast beyond them, bring it to it, and let it drop down onto those points. The tules are the same thing. Bass are real easy to pattern in tules if you look for the little coves, the little finger points, and the little breaks in the tules. Especially this time of year up at Clear Lake, because when you've got these tules where you've got 5 or 6 sparse tules and then it goes into a little pocket and cove, and then you got masses of tules here, there's a big deep hole right there in the base of those tules. And guess where there's going to be a bed? This time of year, there's going to be a bed right in the back of that pocket. Okay, he's got that cover that's sitting behind him. It's protecting him from the north wind. Okay, it's protecting him from the current that's being generated from the north wind, okay, and it's allowing that sun to come right down in and bake and heat up that bedroom of his. At this time of year, those little pockets in those tules are huge up there because there's going to be a bass and a nest in every single one of them. The other thing that you want to look for, you know, we talk about there are times in grass where you can see big grass pockets, and these fish will, the weather pattern will change, and you know, the pressure will drop, and they'll want to draw tight to cover. Okay, that's one of the things that bass do when we have pressure changes. Say we got a storm comes through, they're all out feeding and going crazy, low light conditions, and then we get a bluebird day. Bang, we got a high pressure sets in for 2 days, we struggle to catch fish. Well, what those fish do, it's just like us going up in an airplane, you know, when we feel the pressure in our head and our ears start to pop. Well, it happens when we're driving up the mountain heading up to Reno and up to Vegas. You know, you have your ears pop, or in an airplane when we're taking off. This high pressure system that comes in after these fronts has the same type of effect on the bass. And when he has that happen to him, he gets very nervous. It's very insecure. Okay, very unsure of himself and his surroundings, because his surroundings are changing. And he does one of two things. He either moves out to the nearest offshore piece of structure where he's a little deeper than where he was, where he feels a little more comfortable, and he'll go out there and suspend. Or he'll move in as tight as he possibly can to the nearest cover. Okay? And a lot of times in this grass, that'll be right in the center of the grass pocket, because he's completely surrounded. He feels comfortable in there. Nothing's going to bother me. I'm going to sit here and wait this high pressure system out. Well, they do the same thing in the tules. You know, you look back, you see a lot of times we're up there at Clear Lake and here in the Delta too, where you see guys just buried in the tules. I mean, they're 20, 30, 40 foot in the tules. Okay? Well, what they're doing back there is they're going through the masses of tules and they're looking for the big holes. It's those big holes where you've got something as big or twice as big as this chair, or maybe as big as your boat. Okay, and you got to be real careful when you're at Clear Lake, especially this time of year, that when you're going through those tules and you see that big old hole, stop. Don't hit your trolling motor. Fish that hole extremely thoroughly. Okay, cover every inch of that hole before you proceed and move on to the next one. Even if you see one over there that's got a big piece of wood in it. Okay, remember I told you, cover pattern within a pattern. You get an area where you see tules that's got a hole, that's a good indication and a good looking spot. You see a piece that's got a wood on it, that's even a better spot. Okay? But what you don't want to do is overlook that first one that you came to. Because if you go straight to that wood just because it's got a double-edged sword and a really good spot, okay, you don't want to overlook something that might, you know, hold those fish in the event that they're not there. Because if you go over them, you're going to spook those fish and you may not be able to catch them if you come back through. So you always want to be sure is when you're up there playing around at Clear Lake and you're trying to figure out the patterns and what the fish are doing, don't overlook any of these patterns within the patterns. Okay? With docks, you'll find if you go up there this time of year, the first 2 to 3 pylons on those docks, if you're just up there looking around, you're going to go find that you generally are going to find a bed somewhere within 6 feet of one of those shallow pylons. Almost religiously, almost on any dock, anywhere throughout the lake. Bass just love that kind of stuff, especially the males. They're pretty smart. What they do is they'll run up to the bank. They're up there getting ready to build their nests, but before they do that, they take that track. You know, you hear about that transition. Okay, those fish are using that dock, that 100-foot dock, as a highway up to the shallows. They'll follow right along those pylons up to the shallows, and then they're just sitting there and they're going, okay, this is a likely spot, and he builds his nest. Well, the females do the same thing. Okay, before they get on the bed, the male's got a job he has to go do, and that's to go build the nest and prepare for the entire mating process, which is the most important cycle of a bass's life. Well, as the males are up first, the females come meandering up along this highway. Okay, and where they're going to sit is they're going to sit on those big pylons on the ends of those, at the upper end, shallow end of those docks. The bass is going to be out here 6, 7, 8 feet away from the dock, building his bed, maybe as close as 1.5 feet. The female, she's just going to kind of sit there and suspend and hang around. So when you're pulling up to Clear Lake and you're getting up on those docks, you want to start fishing before you get to the third one out. You want to start fishing. If you're flipping Senkos, if you're pitching plastics, okay, you're throwing those baits into those docks before you get up there, and then you're looking out to where you can then fish the area where those beds are going to be. Because that female, she's going to sit there on the end of that dock till he says, okay, it's time. He's going to go get her, give her a few kisses, court her, put his arm around her, and drag her into the bedroom. Okay, and they're going to stay there for a period of 2 to 3 days together. Then the female leaves, and what does she do? She goes right back to those pylons. Okay, in the event that you don't have docks, you may have a willow bush 6, 7 feet away. Okay, a lot of times if you come up to a bed where you saw 2 big bass on it one day, and you come up there the next day during your tournament and you look and there's just the smaller of the 2 bass sitting there, okay, and you know it's impossible that anybody got to that spot before you did to yank the female off the bed, okay, look for the nearest piece of cover, because that's where that female is going to be. She's going to be over there by that cover. Her job is to get up there and drop the eggs. That's really all her job is, okay? The buck has all the work. He's got to get up there, he's got to build the nest, then he's got to go out and court the female, then he's got to fertilize the eggs. When she's done dropping them, then it's his job to protect the eggs. Okay? Then it's his job to fend off all of the different bait fish and forage fish and predators are trying to get those eggs. Once the eggs have hatched and the fry come out and develop, then it's his job to babysit. At which point in time those fry are grown to a position where they can go off and go hide in the grass and be themselves. Okay? This is one reason why when we're fishing team tournaments, why guys, you always hear guys say, let's go get the buck. Get the buck out of there, especially if you got 2 of them on the bed. Or if you've got the buck on the bed and you can see the female close by, go in and get that buck out of the bed. It's very important to do that, because if you do, now you're forcing that female to do his job. And she's no good at it. But she's going to do it because one of the 2 of them have to do it. Okay, and this is the reason why when we're bed fishing, we go up and we try and get that buck out of there first. Because we know that female's got to come back. She's going to come back to that bed. And we had this prime example of this happen yesterday when we were shooting that video out on the river where we did exactly that. I caught the buck out of there. We went back in there, and this big old female came out of nowhere to protect the nest and grabbed that Senko that Doug threw up in there. Same thing's going to happen up here. Only these fish tend to be a lot more aggressive. Okay, a lot of times when you catch that buck, that female, she's already right there coming to look to see what's happening, why he's getting drugged. Yes, Tom?
How long does it take for the female to move up once you snatch the buck out of there?
It can vary. I mean, each fish is individual. It's just like you and me. When they ring the dinner bell, how long does it take for us to get away from the computer and walk to the dining room? You may be there right away. I may be there an hour later, okay? It really depends. I can't give you a definitive on that. But generally, in my mind, if that female doesn't come over there within 3 minutes, I'm not going to waste my time. I'm going to go find another bed where I can yank the buck off, and that female's going to come over there right away. Because a lot of time, and one of the most frustrating things with me in bed fishing, and one of the reasons why I don't do it, is you can get so locked on trying to catch a fish, time flies, okay? Time really doesn't go by as fast when you're catching them. But when you're not catching them, especially in tournaments, time just seems to just go by. And when you're being unproductive in a tournament, that, to me, is very frustrating. If I'm not catching them, that's very frustrating, okay? And this is why one of the things I always share with folks, and especially in the springtime, and up here, I struggle the most when I try and sight fish shallow for beds. Because on a given lake in any period of time, you've only got 30% of the population of bass up on beds. There's just not enough room, and there are not enough males in a lake to handle the entire population all at once. Plus, due to the areas that they live in, certain areas warm sooner, they warm later, right on down, and if the deeper fish are, the longer it takes them to make that migration process up to the shallow water. This is why this end of the lake pops sooner in the springtime. Okay, the north end of the lake always goes sooner than the springtime, than in the spring, than down on this end of the lake. This end of the lake's really good in late April and May and into June. This end of the lake is awesome in February, March, and early April. So depending on where you are in that spring, determines which area of the lake you want to be at to have the potential to catch the biggest and be on the largest amount of fish that are up shallow. I like to turn around and go chase the 70% of the fish that aren't up shallow that 90% of the fishermen are going after. 90% of the field, 90% of your anglers are up here looking for fish on beds. I like taking step off and looking for those fish down here, that 70% that aren't on beds that are transitioning and moving up. 10% of the field's looking for 70% of the fish. How many times do you hear that? 10% of the guys catch 99% of the fish. Okay, this is just one of my thought processes in the springtime. I don't like messing with those fish, and I just got this thing about taking a 10-pound, an 8-pound, a 6-pound female off a bed and carting her all the way up to the other end of the lake and weighing her in, because I know now that fish is not going to spawn. Okay, and as much as I want to win that tournament, that thought process for me takes precedence. And I just can't seem to catch them as easy as I can these fish out here. So I spend all my time on those fish that aren't up on the beds. But bed fishing's a lot of fun because you get to see and watch how bass react when they're up there. And that's one of the things that I can instill in you, that if you ever want to do any bed fishing, spend 45 minutes just sitting there watching these fish. Go to 3 or 4 different beds. Just watch these fish. Watch how they react. Start on one end of the bed, move around to the other. Move all the way around it. Just watch these fish. It's as amazing to watch them as it is to catch them. When you catch them, it's instantaneous. Bing, bang, boom. Thank you, ma'am, it's over. But if you sit there and you watch those fish and you get an understanding of what they're doing, watching how they're fending off bait, you see which bait fish, okay, which predators they fend off the most. Now you're beginning to get a better idea on what you should be throwing in there. Because if you're throwing something black and blue and there's nothing black and blue coming in and around that nest, the likelihood that those bass are going to get excited and move that bait out of there is slim and none. But if there's something brown with an orange chin and a big blue dot on the side of his gill that's coming in there running around, maybe that's something you want to be imitating, because if he sees something like that, he's going to fend it off. Okay? And there are a lot of different predators up there at Clear Lake. I mean, you've got many varieties of bluegill. You got the hitch, you got the carp, you got crappie, you've got lizards, salamanders, big crawdads, you got frogs, you got ducks, you got diving birds, you got a whole bunch of different forage up there that really bothers them. The one thing that you don't have to worry about is shad. Okay, shad aren't up on the beds eating the bass, the baby bass, and bothering them. So if you're up there fishing shad baits, that's probably one of the least types of baits that they're going to worry about, especially if you do like I do when you're blind casting, because I do a lot of blind casting when I'm bed fishing. I'm bed fishing. I love to bed fish, but I don't sit there and sight on them. I just kind of blind cast. Okay. And I'm not fishing for those fish that are locked on beds. 9 times out of 10, if I think there's a bed in an area, I'll throw to it, and then I'll throw to where I think might be the hallway. And I know some guys, they talk, well, what's the difference whether you're yanking them out of the hallway or whether you're yanking them off the bed? I think there's a big difference, because when they are on the bed, they're getting ready to drop their eggs. When they're in the hallway, either A, they haven't got to that point yet, or B, they've already done it and left. Okay, so those fish that are in the hallway, I feel a lot more comfortable catching, and I also feel I can target them easier. But docks are real huge, especially this time of year. Now later in the year, in the fall and the summer, those fish are going to move way out to the deepest part of that dock. Okay, and a lot of times what guys will do is they're up there fishing the docks one day and they're clocking them pretty good, and all of a sudden they come back the next day and they can't find that bite. It disappeared. Well, pull up to that dock. You know, if you were on the side catching them between the last one and the inside one, and that's where you were catching them, pull up to that dock and just turn a 180. Cast out behind you, guys, because that's where they're at. They're not going far. Okay? If they're not up underneath those docks eating, just turn right around and cast between the docks, because that's where you're going to find them. Okay? Same thing if you're fishing out on the ends. Get up on the end of that dock. Instead of fishing that, just turn 180 and throw out behind you, because that's what they're going to do. There's all that grass out there that we're sitting right on top of. And we're overlooking and missing a whole bunch of fish, and we're sitting there scratching our head. Well, let's go to the next dock. Well, wait a minute. You just left a big bunch of fish. You were catching them there. They're there. It's just they're not on the cover that you had the day before. And that's what these bass at Clear Lake do. They'll move up into the cover they want, and then all they do is back off for whatever reason. Okay, whether it's guys running up and down the docks, whether it's predators that come in, angler pressure or whatever, they just back off. Okay. The other cover is wood. And there's a lot of different varieties of wood. You've got the big laydown woods, okay? You've got your willow tree bushes, you know, the smaller, young, juvenile trees that are just now growing that are all underwater. And then you have just the root system of these trees that are growing on the bank. And then the root system is down below them out of the water. And you can find these really good in late in the summer and October as the lake begins to fall down. You can find these areas where these big giant willow trees are going, like up around Willow Point. It's a great place to go look. Cache Creek's a great place to go look. You see these great big huge willow trees growing. You see these big root systems, and you'd be surprised. You got a root this big around that comes out off the bank, and there's this big open hole right here. There's a structural change. There's wood. There's a nice piece of cover. Those bass sit right in there. So when you're fishing that wood and those trees and those roots, you want to cast right to the center of that tree, where you've got a tree that's sitting in the water and the roots that are coming out. Cast right to the center of the tree and get it right down in the roots. Okay? Then cast to the sides. Then cast to the sides. Your first cast needs to be in the middle of that root, because that's where the biggest and the best fish and most likely spot that fish is going to be. Okay? If he's not there, gives you the opportunity to fish it all around it. Same thing with your bushes. Okay? When you're pulling up to a bush, cast right in the middle of that bush. If that fish isn't in there on the first try, cast in there again. Throw that jig, throw that worm, throw that brush hog, whatever it is. Throw it in there 2, 3, 4 times. Okay? If they don't take it, because you may have a fish that's in one of 3 modes. He may be aggressive, which isn't likely because he's in the cover. If he's deep in that cover, he's probably not an aggressive acting fish. Okay? But they got to eat. Depends on how long he's been there. He's going to either be a neutral fish that maybe have, you know, maybe needing to eat, but really doesn't want to go out and search for food. But if something comes to him, he's going to take it instantly. And then you may have that fish that's in that absolute total negative mode. He doesn't care about feeding at all. But if you throw it in there once, twice, 2, 3 times, you're going to aggravate him. And eventually he's just going to get tired of seeing whatever that creature is that keeps knocking on his door. Okay, he's down there trying to read a book. He's trying to relax. He's trying to recover. Okay, he's thinking about where he's going to go find his next girlfriend. Who knows? You're throwing that bait down in there 3, 4, 5 times, he's going to get fed up with it. Okay? Repeated casts. Then once you cover that prime area, the most likely place where that fish is going to be, then you start working and picking apart the outsides. Okay, this is more critical, I think, at Clear Lake than any other body of water that I've fished for bass. It's a concept that I use in a lot of places, but more so up at Clear Lake. Get into the deepest, and when you can't find them located outside in the open water around cover, go straight into the deepest portion first and go in there multiple times. Okay. Any question on the cover?
Yes.
Yes, Tom.
In the spring, I've been up there several times in the spring, and I've noticed that I see several large bass suspended underneath the docks, and I've thrown up to them, and they just kind of swim away. They look at the bait and they just swim away. Is there any way to get those fish to...
Probably not. I've not been able to catch those fish.
Now, if you can see them, can they actually see you? Like?
Oh, absolutely. They can see you. I mean, if the water's real clear, they can see you. You bet they can see you. Okay? And there may be situations where you have 6 inches of visibility. Okay? You can't see the fish, he can see you. We don't realize how good a bass's eyesight really is. When they're in a water where there's a foot of visibility, I think that bass can see 6 foot. Okay? When you're in gin clear water, that bass can see 10, 12 foot away. Okay? And I see this all the time. I'm up there and I pitch a Senko into an area where I don't see a bass, but I know there's a bed, and all of a sudden from 10 feet away, this bass just comes straight up and clocks that Senko. He saw it hit the water. Okay, I see this happen all the time. If that bass is going to clock your bait, when you throw it in there, he's going to come and get it. If he turns around and goes away, it's not likely you're going to catch that fish. And you're better off finding and trying to get other areas. Now, at Clear Lake, one way I would attempt to try and catch those fish would be to start from here to the highway. Okay, I saw that fish out there. Let me go away and let him settle in. Take that trolling motor and go get way far away from him. Come back a half hour later. Sneak up on that dock and from 40 foot away, then throw your bait in there 10 feet past where he was at and bring it to him. You might have the opportunity to catch him that way. One of the baits that I found for those big suspending fish that works best for me is a 9L 031 Senko. It's a big white shad looking Senko. And that's a pattern that works extremely well in the late summer and fall time up there as the shad are getting real big. They'll come out and clock an easy meal. The other one that tends to work pretty good is the Zara Spook. You can back way off of those fish, throw that Zara Spook 30 feet beyond that bass, okay, and then slowly fish it up so you bring it right to them. A lot of times out of aggression, they'll come out and hit that spook. Those are the only two ways that I've been able to ever catch them, and my catch percentage is probably about 2% when you can see them.
Okay.
When you can see them. Sometimes you'll flip that bait in there and they'll go get it right away. But otherwise, they're very difficult and hard to catch. Any other questions on cover before we move on? Okay, let's talk a little bit about forage. There's a lot of food sources in Clear Lake. A lot of food sources. It's endless. And the primary food source at Clear Lake is crawdads. I think that is just because the crawdads are so predominant throughout the entire lake, especially in the areas that you find tules. Okay, and there are tules everywhere. Crawdads do associate with rocks, but at Clear Lake, they really associate with tules because those tules are on a hard bottom for the most part. A lot of areas, that's a fairly hard bottom. Where you don't see the tules, where you have the open water, okay, you can go out there and you're going to find a softer, silty type bottom. But where you've got those good tule growth, more often than not, you're going to find a little bit harder bottom than you are away from the tules. There are a lot of those crawdads down on that south end of the lake just as well, and I think that is the primary forage for those fish. Another key forage for the fish up there are the shad. There's a lot of shad in the lake, and you know, we've heard in years past it used to be the silver sides. The silver sides no longer, I think they've pretty much all but disappeared. We don't hear too much about the silver sides anymore. They were a much smaller bait fish that used to run in huge schools that used to be everywhere up there. But now the shad, much like the bass, just grow to monstrous proportions in the summertime. They're big, big shad. They're not, you know, right now they're pretty small. They're about 2 inches long. But you wait till, you know, September, October, you're going to find those shad are going to be 4 or 5 inches long. Okay, they get big, they get huge up there. Okay, one of my favorite baits in the fall when those fish are on the shad is a 1 ounce rattle trap. Okay, it's an awesome bait up there in the summertime. Okay, get up to Rocky Point, areas like that, throw this kind of bait, get on them big docks where you find schools of shad and throw this bait, you're going to catch a lot of fish and you're going to catch some big ones. You're going to catch a lot of those 4 and 5 pounders. I like that one this time of year and a little earlier in the year after they've spawned, before the late summer. I like throwing this little bait because right now this really is the color of the shad up there. They've got that whitish silvery kind of bottom, and then they've got that yellowish and real blue hue towards the up midline, the lateral line and up. And they're a little smaller in size, so I like to kind of, more like with this bait, when they're bigger, I like to scale down when the shad are a little smaller. Okay, those bass, they're pretty smart. They know what they're feeding on and they know what they're eating. And when you're throwing these baits, you need to really kind of sort of imitate the hatch. But the shad and the silver sides, what's left of them are two. This time of year in the springtime, there's another bait fish that becomes a primary source, especially of those larger bass, and that's the hitch. Okay, and the hitch are more predominant this time of year because throughout the year, I mean, they have the same kind of cycle as a bass. They go up, they spawn, then they go out and live in the middle of the lake. Okay, the only time you find those hitch up shallow is when it's time to spawn, and what they want to do is they want to move up to the into those shallow creeks. Okay, and get into those areas where they can get out of the main lake up into the backwaters, into those big creeks. And the kind of places you want to look for these is like down at Willow Point. You've got the canal that goes here, and you got the canal that goes there, and then you've got the trailer park. Okay? Shad are moving into that kind of area. You've got creek channels here all the way up this shoreline. You got catfish, and you've got holiday, and you've got Corinthian. I mean, I can go on and on and on. You got Kelsey, you got State Park, okay? You got all these up at the north end. You got Rodman. You got the three little creeks that come in here. You got the three that come in here, okay? You've got Holiday Harbor up here, okay? I mean, I can go on and on and on and on and on of all these places. This is where those hitch are going this time of year, okay? These are extreme. Down on the south end of the lake, you got Cache Creek. You got the Keys, okay? Down at the Keys, you got the little bridge by the new launch ramp, and down around the end by M&M, you got the main channel that goes in there, okay? Then you got a little park and a little bay over there. Okay, those are opening, those are creeks, just like on a regular lake. They're creek channels. Yes, Bob? Oh, these places, they go way back. I mean, a lot of the areas, I mean, sometimes you can only get your boat so far, but the creek continues beyond where we can get our boats.
Is that an actual creek there by the gazebo, or is that just a trough?
It's more of a trough and drainage ditch back there. Okay, and then a couple of these you have, you've got, you know, I think there's some launch ramps in the back of them, and then there's houses, you know, but that's where those hitch are going. A good majority of them are going over this way. That's where you find the most of them. I think at other times of the year, you find later in the spring, you find some of the hitch on this end of the lake that are coming into these. But these are the key ones to go here, okay? And this is where the guys are fishing swim baits. For those of you, how many of you guys fish swim baits up at Clear Lake? Okay? You having a lot of success throwing them? Are you fishing these kind of areas? Because that's what you do, guys. You get out in the mouth of these things, okay? You've got the tule walls that lead into the mouth. Those hitch, they're coming out of the middle of that main lake, and they're coming right into that opening. You got your tule walls here, okay? Okay, this is the area you want to be throwing them swim baits. Sometimes you can sit out here and cast up into it, work it right straight back at you. Sometimes you can sit and just cast parallel into those tules, or you can cast perpendicular to them. But these are the kind of areas you want to be. If you want to catch swim bait fish, like Byron Velvick, like Aaron Martins, and like John Broussard, okay, and all those guys that have got this bite dialed in, these are the kind of areas you want to start fishing. These are the kind of areas you want to start fishing that swim bait. Okay? And if you're going to go up there throwing that swim bait, you want to go purchase that Clear Lake hitch swim bait. Don't throw a trout up at Clear Lake, guys. There ain't no trout in Clear Lake. Okay? Remember, we're matching the hatch. We're dealing with the forage that's on this lake. Okay? Don't throw a baby bass. Save the baby bass for when you're bed fishing. Okay, baby bass are sitting out there, you know, and those little 6 and 8 inch bass that can't spawn, they're up there trying to eat the fry and the eggs too. They don't know any different. Okay, bass are fending those out. Those small baby bass swim baits, they work good on those bed fish up there. Little secret a lot of guys don't say. They take that baby bass swim bait, they throw it on the bed, and they just let it sit there. Okay, but when you're fishing out here in these areas, and you're chasing that hitch. You're going after them big giant bass that are eating on that hitch. Okay, those are the kind of areas you want to be fishing, and you want to be throwing that hitch. Okay, there's a lot of baits out there today in these swim baits where they're coming out with new patterns and new color patterns, but everybody's starting to get into this Clear Lake hitch. All of the swim bait manufacturers are coming out with a Clear Lake hitch, and that's what you want to be fishing. Now, there are a lot of varieties of swim baits out there. I prefer, this is an Optimum swim bait here. It's a 5-6 inch bait, and I prefer the ones where I have the big hook on top and I can attach a treble hook at the bottom. Okay, this is just my preference. And from what I've learned from a couple of the guys that I've been up there fishing with last spring. Because what happens is that bait swimming, those fish come up and clock it from the side, and a lot of times they'll turn it and they're going to hit the tail end because it's that tail movement that entices and gets that bass's attention more than anything. Okay? They see that tail going like this, and that's what triggers and turns them on. That's the action. It's the action of that tail that is turning that bass on. Okay? Obviously, it's a perfect imitator of how that hitch moves through the water. And quite frankly, I've never seen a hitch move through the water. I've seen them in masses up in the shallows. Okay? And yeah, that's what they look like. They're that color. But I've never seen one swimming. I've just seen schools of them sitting there spawning. But those bass come up, because remember, you're reeling it in, they come up and clock it from the side. A lot of times they're going to turn over and hit that bait and miss. A lot of guys, when they're out there throwing swim baits, they're saying, man, I'm getting clocked, but I'm not getting hookups. Okay? Well, you put that treble hook down on the bottom, guess what? Now you're going to get those hookups. Because that fish that comes in and clocks that tail, he's going to get stuck on a treble hook.
How do you got that on there?
Well, there's a little wire in these Optimums and some of the swim baits. They provide there's a little wire there, okay, that comes down and you attach an O-ring and about a 3/0 or 4/0 Gamakatsu wide gap. I prefer using the standard round bend. It's just got a bigger bite on it, okay, and it just gives me good angle, and I can tuck it right in there, and it absolutely affects the movement of the bait zero. That bait swims. Now, this bait's not going to be as productive. It'll be pain in the butt fishing it in the grass. Okay? But see, that's the cool thing about this. If I got to fish it in the grass to get bites, I can take the treble hook out or go to a swim bait where I don't have the treble hook tied to it. The other thing is this one being a weighted swim bait, it allows me to fish the entire column. Okay, I can start fishing it on top, I can drop it down a couple feet, I can drop it down a couple feet more, I can go all the way to the bottom and drag it. Okay, there are some suspending ones that Optimum makes that work extremely well, but I've come to the decision, I like keeping things so simple, guys, in my fishing. You know, if I'm going to throw swim baits, just give me one swim bait. It's one I know works. It's one I know guys are catching fish up there. I don't want to have to be going through 36 versions and varieties of swim baits. I don't throw an awful lot of swim baits and rely on it. What I like to do is pick it up. If I can get bit and get on the swim bait bite, great. If it ain't there, then I'm done with it. I'll pull up to one of these areas, I'll make 4 or 5 casts. If I don't get bit on a swim bait, then by golly, I'm grabbing my Senko and I'm going to the bank and drop it in the Tules, okay? If I hear the swim bait is off, I just don't throw it. I may pick it up and toss it every now and then, but when I throw it out there and I get bit on my first time, now it's hard to get that thing out of my hand. Now I'm going to throw it a lot. I don't use it a lot in tournaments because, you know, it's like frog fishing. One day it's there and the next day it's gone. And when it's gone, you got to give it up and get off of it. But when it's there, you don't want to overlook it. So you might as well be prepared with the right kind of bait that's going to increase your percentages. The right color, the right setup. Okay, and then I personally think if I'm going to throw swim baits, this is the best setup for me. It's worked when I've been on them. I don't miss fish. Thank you, John Broussard. Thank you, Tim Rossitelli. They showed me how to do this up there, and it works. And since they showed me how to use this bait in the kinds of areas to fish, my swim bait fishing has gone 100% tenfold when I am swim bait fishing. But it's not a technique that I can rely on. If it ain't on, I ain't going to throw it. If it's on, it's a bait I'm not going to overlook. But it's an awesome, awesome bait. If you want to catch a bass of a lifetime, if you're just up playing around, at Clear Lake, this is the bait to be throwing this time of year. I'm actually using 16-pound fluorocarbon on my swim bait fishing, and for me it's a little different. Some guys like a big 7-8 foot rod. For me, I'm using a 5-power S-glass rod with 10 guides on it. It's a rod that I can take. I can throw this bait a mile. Okay, you get in, and this particular one here is a 6'6". I can fish this bait for hours and hours and hours and not get tired. If I get one of those 7-9, them great big giant stout rods like what Byron uses and some of the other guys, boy, after a half hour, and he uses them big swim baits. Byron loves throwing them big swim baits. That's okay. Byron owns the world, the BASS record. And that's what it takes. You got to throw those kind of baits if you want to set those kind of records. But for the average guy that's up there on a daily basis, for me, a guy who doesn't throw swim baits all the time, that's just too much for me. That's too much. I mean, I'm an old man. I'm 46 now, right? Okay? I get tired after a while throwing that. I'm used to pitching and flipping. When I get out there chucking and whining a 4-ounce bait on a big 10-ounce rod and 5-ounce reel all day long, it gets very tiresome. This setup allows me to fish the swim bait more effectively and longer. I get less fatigue when I'm doing it. And with the treble hooks in there, I don't need that heavy, stout setting hook power. Okay? It's one of the reasons why they like to throw those big heavy-duty rods, is because a lot of those guys just fish the one hook. Okay, they just and boy, when you got just that one hook on a big fish, you got to have a lot of power to set that big giant hook in there. But if you got that treble hook back there, you don't need near as much power. Okay, and I don't want to jerk this bait out of a fish's mouth. I want him to come up and grab it, feel it, give it a good pop and load it up, and let the treble hooks do their work. And that works out extremely well for me when I'm up there throwing swim baits. Another technique that works extremely well, sometimes that swim bait bite on these springtime hitch that are moving up, okay, or like now where you've got all the shad are up in the shallows, okay, another technique up there that is awesome this time of year is throwing a rip bait. Okay, what I have here is Stacy Aurora Black. For me, this one works best. I do have some of the Pointer 128s and some of the other varieties. There really are only 2 colors that I like to use when I'm up there. And I've only started doing this rip bait thing the last 2 years. And more so last year than this year. Gary Dobbins has just pounded this bait in my head. And I put it in my mind to figure out how it works and how it catches bass. I think I've done a pretty good job to where I can be effective with it up there. Whether I have the confidence now to go fishing in a tournament or not and stay with it all day, I don't think I have that confidence. But I have the confidence to tie it on and put it on my deck and not be scared to pick it up and throw it. Okay? I know it works. Yes, sir.
I've been doing an awful lot this year of rip bait fishing on all the different lakes doing the Federation tournament.
Yes.
And I'm hooking up all over the place on ghost patterns of the different styles.
Right.
But I keep losing fish and I don't know why. I mean, I'll have the fish on, I'm halfway to the boat, I'm not forcing it, and I'm throwing the hooks. And I got it hooked in his mouth.
What kind of rod you using?
I'm using Shimano, a brown colored V rod.
Action is heavy action.
It's not heavy.
Is it a stiff? Is it wimpy? I mean,
no, it'd be a fast tip.
Fast tip? Because again, I'm using a little different rod than most guys are. And really, I mean, what we need to do is get Gary Dobbins in here and do a video on ripping for us, because he's the man with all the answers. But what I've found that works for me, as with any crankbait fishing, and that's all a rip bait is, guys, is a crankbait. Okay, I use a fiberglass rod. Okay, and again, this is a 5-power fiberglass rod. It's got a lot of give under here, and the backbone is all down here and not up there. And I personally think with a lot of the fiberglass rods that guys are using, there's too much backbone up at the tip, and you tend to jerk those baits out of those fish mouth. Okay, and I also think a lot of guys, from what I've found, one of the things that I found with my rip bait fishing, the strongest pattern for me is to throw that rip bait out there, rip it 3 or 4 times to get it down, and then let it sit. Count to 10. Blink! Oh, there he is. Okay, you know, it's weird. We call it ripping, but the way I catch it, it's twitching. Because really, you jerk it down, and then you just let it sit and twitch it. I don't really rip it real violently. I just twip it, because it's cool the way these baits just kind of suspend. And then you give it a little twitch, and it goes off, and then it suspends. And it's that suspend, do nothing motion. Okay? And I think what guys have to understand and realize is the bass that you're fishing for. I think you have to use a rip bait differently on spotted bass than what you do on largemouth and smallies. Okay, spotted bass is a very aggressive moving fish. It's going to chase down and be very active all the time. So you can get into that ripping. And I think that's the primary ripping that most of us associate and see Gary doing when he's winning all these tournaments, like on Shasta and Orville. I mean, he's won some tournaments ripping on Clear Lake, but I'd be willing to bet he's ripping just a little bit differently up at Clear Lake than he does when he's out there fishing these spots. I mean, this is just something I've noticed over a year and a half. And I found that when I'm on the lakes, the foothill lakes, and I'm catching spots, I too lose more fish than I boat. But when I'm catching the largemouth on these rip baits, I don't lose too many of them. And it may just be, you know, just the nature of the spotted bass and the way we're fishing those baits, and they clock it so fast. You know, we're really not getting good hook penetration, and maybe it is because we're fishing it too fast. I mean, I don't know if you change when you're on fishing those spotted bass versus the pause, or if you're pausing all the time.
At Comanche, I was finding that the fish were absolutely hammering it on the pause, so much so that they started just stopping it.
Right.
And I would get some huge hookups there.
Well, one of the things that I do too that I found with this rip bait is that I do this with crankbaits, I do not set the hook. I just start reeling. When they hit it, just start reeling. Let the fish do the work. I think a lot of times when they come up and clock it as hard as they do, and we go, there he is, and set the hook, now all of a sudden we've got, you know, 2 hooks with 3 puncture points, digging all through that bass's mouth and creating big holes. Now we've created a bigger hole than what really needs to be there, and that fish can move around and get lost. Maybe find that the next time when you're up there and you get bit, just start reeling. Load the rod up and start reeling. Don't jerk them. Don't jerk them, because you may be jerking them out of their mouths and not realizing it, or creating a bigger hole in that mouth so that he can turn just right and get it loose. But this bait, this one and the Ghost Minnow are the two. You know, they've got that one minnow that looks pretty much like a hitch. You know, that one works too, but I have found that this one just catches. I mean, I've been able to go to Clear Lake since about the 10th of December last year, right on up to today, and catch them with this one. I can put that Ghost Minnow on. I don't catch near as many fish, but what I notice happens when I do catch one on that Ghost Minnow, it's much bigger than the ones I catch on this one. Okay, and again, it's that forage thing. Okay, those smaller fish up shallow are clocking shads. Those bigger fish, they're out there eating those hitch. Okay, so when you're up in the springtime, like now, and you're ripping in these areas, go to that ghost color, that minnow looking color. Don't use this one because you're not going to find a lot of shad up in here. Okay, you're going to find those hitch. Those big fish are looking at those hitch. Okay, so let's fish a bait that looks more like a hitch versus something that looks like a shed. It's my old hot dog T-bone theory, guys. How many of you have heard that theory, hot dog T-bone theory? You've been to any of my seminars, okay? Let me tell you about it. Bass are like humans. If I had a T-bone in one hand and a hot dog in another, and I went to this grizzled old healthy veteran here and said, do you want the T-bone or the hot dog? He's going to grab the T-bone every time because he just knows that's just the finest piece of meat that's been served to him, okay? Yet if I walk over to this young man, this juvenile guy over here, and say hot dog or T-bone, 99.999 times he's going to say, give me the hot dog, because they just love hot kids. Juveniles love hot dogs, right? Okay, bass are the same way. If you're serving them hot dogs, those little fish, those juvenile fish are going to eat those hot dogs all day long. Okay? If you serve them T-bones, guess what? You're not going to have to mess with those hot dogs. Every now and then you'll catch that wannabe 10-pounder that's still only 14 inches long or 6 inches long. Okay? You know you can come back in about 7 or 8 years and catch that fish on your T-bone later because he understands. Okay? But that's kind of like what this bait is using this bait, you know. When you're fishing that Aurora, you're imitating shad. Now you're imitating, you're throwing hot dog. Even though you're throwing the same bait, okay, the color pattern you happen to be using is a hot dog color pattern. Versus if you go to that hitch looking color, now you're throwing a T-bone. Okay? Sometimes you can even go with a red rip bait. Oh, we're talking prime rib piece of meat there, fellas. And now we're talking crawdad. You may not get a lot of bites on that red rip bait, but let me tell you what, the one you do, it's going to be a big one. Because there's something about red that just trigger bass. Red triggers bass. They associate red with something to eat. Okay, whether it be a crawdad, whether it be the gills of a bait fish, whether it be the blood of an injured fish, whether it be the wings of a bird, whether it's the eyes of a bait. Okay, there's something about their forage in every way, shape, or form that has an association of red to it. Bass understand that if they see something red, it's something that they can enjoy eating. Okay? And I love getting out down here on the Delta in the wintertime and throwing a red rip bait. It's phenomenal. I do well on the Aurora too. Just like up at Clear Lake. Boy, in the fall time, if you don't have one of those tied on, big Norman D22 deep diving bait that goes 15 to 22 feet, and if you aren't down here on that south end of the lake, okay, down here on that south end of the lake, down on all these rock piles, okay, you aren't down there throwing that great big old bait, you're missing out. Okay, there are certain times of the year like now, you can get up into the shallows when those fish are up in here in Jago and they're up in Konocti. There's a lot of lava rock up on the banks up in there, okay? Get up there and throw that little red crawdad speed trap. Oh, you will be surprised how many fish you'll catch on that little red speed trap. It's the same bait we use down on the Delta. It works up here, okay? Sometimes I'll go and find they don't really want that red. They want that little orangish brown thing with just a little bit of red on the belly. You know, you got to be prepared to adjust. But you get up there and you throw those big red crankbaits. Okay, the big white ones with the chartreuse back and the green back, those work too. You want to go back and forth. But this is a good one. You can throw this one all the time and catch them. I learned that from Keith Clow. Okay, Keith does a lot of cranking, lived on Clear Lake for many, many, many years. And it goes back to the simple things that I tell you. I like to keep my fishing simple. I only throw 2 or 3 crankbaits when I'm up there and really seasonal specific. When I'm in the fall time, I want to be throwing that great big one. Okay, I want to be down there and I want to be digging on those rocks. I want to be on them rock piles. I want to be digging. I want to be on them big rock walls down in Jago. I want to be digging. I want to be down behind Rattlesnake. I want to be digging. I want that dig. I want to be on 2 poles. I want to be digging. Okay, I want to be on that big sandy flat down there on the island, halfway down to Konocti, where there's that pole out in the middle of the lake. Okay, I want to be digging on that big, hard, sandy flat. I want to be down at the pump house on the north side, cranking that big rock pile out there. Okay, same thing down in Cache Creek. I want to be right down the middle of Cache Creek, cranking that thing right down the middle of the creek in that rock bed in the middle of the creek. And I want to be cranking that big bait. Yes, Bob?
Do you ever throw any of the purple back ones, the big crankbaits? That's throwing it does pretty well up there.
I've heard of guys, Clear Lake's a huge brown-purple lake. It doesn't surprise me that a purple crankbait would work. I mean, but I don't throw a lot of them. Because now, you know, I mean, I use purples for other applications up at Clear Lake. When it comes to cranking, I stick to 2 or 3 patterns. The red crawdad, I'll go on in the springtime, I'll have some of those orange-brown crawdad color patterns. And the other pattern is that, you know, the white chartreuse, the little orange belly and the green on the back, or the blue, the chartreuse blue, okay? That's really the only 2 I throw. There are times when you can throw, you know, the big white one, okay, because they are clocking those shad. You can throw that big white one up there with the big dot on it. That works extremely well up there. That's why I'm throwing this one. I mean, if I'm going to throw a shad crankbait, I'll throw this one. And I'll throw this one the same time of year I'll throw this one. I want to throw this one when the fish are on the rocks feeding on crawdads. It's going to dig down there and get those fish. Okay? Shad don't dig on the crawdads. Shad don't dig on the crawdads. So I'm not going to fish a shad-looking crankbait down in the rocks. Okay? Because shad are suspending fish. They're up off the bottom. This is a perfect bait to imitate that. Okay? It works. That lipless crankbait works phenomenally up there at Clear Lake. The other bait, you know, the chartreuse one, that looks a lot like, I mean, we're imitating a bluegill. Okay? Where are bluegills? They're down on the bottom on the rocks. You know, they're feeding on little zooplankton and they're feeding on crawdads and everything else that's down on the bottom. So that's bait. It's fine to be down there digging. Okay?
Bluegills?
Yes, sir.
Can you hook a live bluegill up there and fish with it? Over here as well. I mean,
Yes. By the DFG regulation, you can fish live bait in a given body of water as long as you don't transport it, but you caught it there. So you can catch your bluegill and then hook it right there and fish with it. Okay? You can't catch a bucket of bluegills down here or go buy some bluegill at the store. It's illegal to sell bluegills at the store commercially. Okay? But you can't catch them in one place and transport them to another and use them as live bait. That is illegal. Okay? But what I've had in conversations with DFG biologists and staff is that if you catch a bluegill here, you can use it as live bait. Now, you can't do that with trout anywhere in the state. That is illegal. Okay, so you have to be real careful with the type of forage. You can catch a hitch and use it as live bait. You can catch a shad and use it as live bait. Okay, and that was one of the conversations I was going to have a little further along is live bait fishing. I'm going to kind of speed up here and go into some other stuff. We were talking about crankbaits and swim baits. I want to come back to something where we're talking about forage. You know, one of the most popular right now, I mean, techniques up there to catch fish on Clear Lake, believe it or not, is drop shotting, guys. Okay? And I don't think, well, I think guys are beginning to get it now. 2 years, 3 years after Aaron Martins and all those guys came out up there in Katoral and they won all those tournaments up there on Orville and Shasta, drop shotting, okay? And the drop shot craze, you know, because that's typical of a Bassmaster. Something happens in a Bassmasters, man, it just goes from there, okay? Drop shotting isn't and wasn't anything new at that time. But what it was an opportunity to fish suspending fish on deep structured lakes where you could present a bait to those a subtle bait to those fish that were in that area. Well, what people fail to recognize is that it doesn't just work in shallow or in deep water, but in shallow water as well. Okay? Because what happens in shallow water? Most of the time, we're bouncing something on the bottom, or we're running something on top right over their head. Very rarely do they see something sitting right in front of their face. When you take a drop shot rig, okay, and suspend that bait 6 to 12, 20 inches up off the bottom and just let it sit there in the strike zone and keep it in the strike zone for an extended period of time, those bass can't stand it. They just go, that's just too easy. It's like fishing a Senko. Okay? You throw a Senko out, you let it sit, you do nothing. You leave it in his strike zone. You take it out of his strike zone, you don't care about it. You're not going to get bit. And that's one of the things about fishing, I think, the drop shot, especially at Clear Lake. The key is to get it out there and get in that strike zone and let it sit there. And guys tend to fish a little too fast, especially on lakes with largemouth. These aren't spotted bass. You got to change your attitude and adjust your techniques. When you're drop shotting for largemouth bass, you don't want to be sitting there shaking it all day long. Okay? Just throw it out there and let it sit. Keep a taut line. If you don't eat it, just give it a little tug and move it. Just give it a little tug and move it. Every now and then, give it a little shake. If you get bit, go, oh, okay, now I got a pattern. Throw it out, let it sit, move it, let it sit, then shake it. But stop after 3 or 4 shakes. Okay? A lot of this shaking stuff that we're doing is what we're using to trigger strikes for spotted bass and smallmouth. That doesn't necessarily work all that well for largemouth. There's a couple of baits when you're up at Clear Lake. When you're drop shotting, throwing plastics, huge. Okay? You cannot go up on that lake without 3 colors. You got to have, there's only really 3 that you need. You can start playing with a wide variety of other stuff. Okay? But there are 3 basic colors when you're up there drop shotting that you cannot go up to that lake without. And we'll take these and pass them around. These are some straight tail robo worms in a variety of sizes. I think it's 6, 5, and 4. It really doesn't matter what size you're using. You can drop shot all 3 sizes and you can utilize all 3 colors. Okay? Probably one of the most popular. Remember I told you earlier, Clear Lake is a brown and purple lake. Okay? Margarita Mutilator. It's an awesome, awesome bait. You can't go to Clear Lake without Margarita Mutilator. Okay? The other one is Aaron's Magic. It's an awesome, awesome. Aaron's Magic works like green pumpkin on any body of water in the state across this country where there's bass. Okay? They're going to eat Aaron's Magic just like they eat green pumpkin. Okay? And green pumpkin is probably a 4th color that I would add to that list. Okay? But you can't go there without ox blood. Okay? You got to have these 3. And the other one that I would recommend would be green pumpkin. I have green pumpkin in my boat no matter where I go. I don't go to a lake without green pumpkin. Okay? I don't care whether it's Senkos, cut-tail worms, hula grubs, Zoom brush hogs, Zoom lizards. I can go on and on and on. I've got green pumpkin in every manufacturer's bait that I have confidence in throwing. And Clear Lake's the green pumpkin works up there just as well. But these 3, when you're drop shotting, these are the 3 best. You will find somewhere in your selected area where they're going to eat Margarita Mutilator, Ox Blood, or Aaron's Magic. Okay? I'm eliminating all of your selection process right here, guys. These are the only 3 you really need to take. Now, there's one other that I've discovered the last 2 years that works extremely well. And I think a lot of guys overlook this. And I found this a couple weeks ago where I have a lot of shad-looking stuff in my boat as well. Because I use them for trailers on spinner baits. I use them on dart heads on the foothill lakes from time to time. Well, I'm now drop shotting these at Clear Lake. And I found a couple weeks ago when that cold front settled in up there, you know, right after the Everstart, and all those fish pulled off the bank and they started suspending. They said, I ain't going to spawn no more. And it was like this carried on cold for 2 weeks. The water temperature went from 67 down to 55 degrees. And then it slowly started coming back up. Well, those fish can't spawn, so what do? They get over that shock of the weather change and the temperature drop, they've left the bedroom, they've gone back into the hallway and the den. Well, they got to eat. All those shad in that cool water said, oh, we got to move up shallow where it's a little bit warmer because we're not used to those drastic kind of changes. And that happens a lot up there. We have the big shad die-offs. Okay, it's because those shad have moved shallow this time of year. They want to spawn. It gets cold. Shad don't deal well with temperature changes either. Okay, and they don't deal well when the temperature gets below 50, 47, 46, 44 degrees. They start dying. That's why we see all the shad die off up there at Clear Lake. It's because those drastic temperature drops. Well, what happens? Those shad that are up shallow, they pull off. They sit right above the bass's head, and the bass go, well, let's just sit there and feed till it starts getting warm and we go up. When they're doing that, you can catch them pretty good on Margarita Mutilator, but you can also get out there with a white grub. Okay, you can get out there with a white Gets It. Anything that's white, you can get out there with one of those little mini skirts by Reaction Innovations. They got those neat little white ones. You probably can get out there with a white brush hog, a little 4-inch white brush hog. Okay, you get in there and drop shot that. Now, the thing that I'm going to give you, the tip that I'm going to give you that you're probably not doing, and it will increase your bites tenfold, is carry a black Sharpie with you all the time. Now, most guys might think I carry this for autographs. Not the case. Okay? I carry a black Sharpie with me all the time to use while I'm on the water. I do not get in my boat without a black Sharpie in my pocket. And the reason being is I can easily put 2 dots on a bait to match the hatch. Okay? How many of you guys do that? Anybody here do that? You'd be surprised the difference that will make. You get in that school of shad and you drop that bait down there and you're sitting there drop shotting that bait in that school of shad and you're not getting bit and you're going, well, what the heck? What's going on? How come they're not eating? It don't look like what they're feeding on. Okay? You put those 2 little dots, drop it back down there, doink, right away. Wow, man, that shad just fell right into his strike zone. It's huge. It makes all the difference in the world between getting bit and not getting bit. It's putting those 2 little dots on that bait. Give that a try up there, guys. Trust me, it will work.
Do you draw dots in other baits, other worms?
No,
In other lakes?
no, not too often. Sometimes I'll use this if I'm throwing, sometimes if I'm throwing a frog, I'm going to paint the bottoms of my frogs. I mean, I'll use it on other baits at times. If I'm up there and I'm fishing for something, and say I'm using Fire Tiger crankbaits, and I've broken off all 4 that I brought to the lake with me, and all I got is chartreuse with black back crankbaits. Now I can make a Fire Tiger out of it. I can use it to paint. The tool's there to be able to make and use it what I need. I mean, I will do that on times. Sometimes I'll get where if I'm throwing white on white spinnerbaits, okay, and I do this a lot up at Clear Lake, and this is very effective. Use a spinnerbait's an effective tool up at Clear Lake, okay, especially in the late summer and the fall when a nasty weather storm comes in, okay, or the overcast comes in. You go find the grass up on the bank and start chucking a spinnerbait. You will catch a ton of fish. Well, I'll go and I'll draw dots on the blades, okay? Huge. Makes all. Sometimes it can make all the difference between getting bit and not getting bit. When I'm up there at Clear Lake, I like 2 basic spinnerbaits, and I throw. When I'm at Clear Lake, I use 1 brand. I use the Yamamoto spinnerbaits. I've just found that this bait works extremely well for me up there. When I'm down in other areas, when I go to and when I'm fishing the spots, I use a completely different spinnerbait. When I'm down on the river, I use a completely different spinnerbait. This is the one I have confidence up there in. Is the Yamamoto spinnerbait, and I like using the one that's either solid white with white blades, okay, or I use this Chartreuse Tiger, and I use a Senko trailer. Okay, how many times you guys, when you're out there fishing spinnerbaits, you feel that, toom, toom, and then nothing? Or sometimes you'll throw that out and they go, toom, 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 and then they got it, okay? If you're not using trailers, or you are using trailers and you're missing fish or not holding on to it, try using the tail end of your old Senkos. Okay, I mean, I know you guys just take that Senko and throw it overboard. Start throwing it in the bottom of your boat, especially the chartreuse kind of ones, or the white ones, or the smoke ones. Okay, this is that 031 that I have. But I use these old pieces of Senkos, leftover Senkos, as trailers. I'm not going to go waste my money buying grubs. I've got them right here. I've already spent. I'm going to get as much as I can out of my Senko. And as a trailer on a spinnerbait or a buzzbait, it's awesome. Okay. And because it's that long, slender thing. And what happens when that fish comes up and first grabs it like it's grabbing a skirt, and you feel that, he goes, ooh, salty, and grabs the whole thing. Got him, fish in the boat. Okay? I throw that spinnerbait out now with that Senko, I get that, and I always get that third one that says he's got it in his mouth. Okay? Now, the other thing that you can do is you can take your pocket knife and split that thing right down the tail. Okay? Sometimes that can make all the difference in the world. Give it two tails. Now you got these two things coming out on the backside. Okay, it looks pretty cool in the water too. But I like throwing gold on gold blades with the chartreuse, and then the solid white on white. Those are what works best for me. I know there are other guys that like to play around under lighted conditions, and they do well up there with spinnerbaits, but for me, I go to it when I see a storm in the front come through in the late summer and fall, because that's when I seem to be able to catch the biggest, the best, and the most fish on spinnerbaits. Okay?
No tubes.
No, I don't throw tubes. Tubes just a jig to me. And if I'm gonna, I used to throw tubes all the time. We got so many baits in our arsenal. I spent probably the first 10 years of my fishing using tubes. I'm burnt out on tubes. I like playing with all the new stuff, okay? Sweet beavers, coolest bait in the world. Okay, brush hog, lizards. I mean, these are cool baits that I didn't get a chance to fish with that I'm just now fishing with. I find that, we got, Yamamoto's got this thing called the Ika. There's my tube bait, a tubeless tube bait. Okay, a little more versatile, I think, than a tube. A little more denser. I can fish it weightless. I can do a lot of different things. So, I mean, there's so many baits available to us now, The Boom Boom tubes, those Reaction Innovation tubes, those are cool tubes. Andre Moore's got some great color schemes coming out of that mine of his. I mean, he has just put some phenomenal, the California 420, the mossy grass, some of the Texas craw, and some of these things that he's coming up with are just great. I love the two-tone colors of those baits. I don't think I brought any of them up there with me, but that two-tone color thing is cool because you get that water bug. It's watermelon red on one side, you turn it over, it's June bug, hence water bug. Okay, you fish it with the watermelon red on the upside, pre-spawn. Okay, those fish are feeding. They're working on crawdads. They're building. They're body fat. They're generating the eggs, nourishment. They're eating crawdads. They're plentiful. Okay, after the spawn, you take it over and you turn it on the June bug up. Now what's it look like? It looks like a bait fish, a bluegill, a bream, a crappie, something coming through the water. Okay, it's cool. I don't have to go buy two baits. I got one bait to do two jobs. Okay, remember, I like to keep things simple. I'm very frugal. I don't like to spend a lot of money. Why buy two bags when I can get the job done with one? So those color patterns that he makes are phenomenal. And my favorite color of all of that is that water bug. And you can pass that around because it's kind of got that brown purple color. I mean, and Clear Lake's a brown purple kind of lake. Okay, go ahead and pass that around. We'll stem one over on this side. The water bug's a great one. That is just a great color, whether it's his tube or whether it's his I personally like the sweet beavers.